What's up, everyone? If you're looking for someone to stash on your bench who could go off in Week 1, this is the video for you. We will be looking at Week 1 early waiver wire targets to help get your roster ready for the first game of the fantasy football season. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. In today's video, we will be looking at early waiver wire targets for Week 1 of the fantasy football season. I will be going through guys that are under 50% rostered in ESPN leagues that should be added onto your team and could potentially go off in Week 1 given the matchups and the situation on their particular teams. If you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel. The future schedule moving forward for this channel, I will be releasing videos discussing early waiver wire targets and buy low, sell high candidates every Monday morning, so you could check that out. I will also release content over the weekend of start-sit decisions for guys that are lightly rostered, and have a live video coming out Sunday morning that will help you get ready for any last-minute decisions that you have. So if you're interested in content to help you get ready for your fantasy football season and to win Week 1, win your league, then subscribe to the channel. Drop any comment. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so what we will be doing in this video is I will be going through the guys that are lightly rostered in leagues. This is particularly using stats from ESPN formats. For each of the positions, I will give you at least 5 names of guys that you should consider adding to your team, as well as give you some potential drop candidates as well. I will not really be talking buy-sell because in general, I don't really like to trade players before Week 1. I drafted them for a reason, and there isn't really a whole lot of new information necessarily to put out there for a lot of these players that would warrant trade situations. So if you want to see particular guys in terms of how I rank them, if you're considering trading some players, I would refer back to my positional videos from the off-season content. And then as we get past Week 1 and we get some more data, I will give you a little bit more information of who I would recommend to buy low and sell high for. I'm just saying that realistically because that's how most managers are going to be approaching it as well. They're not going to be trying to trade too many of their guys right before the season starts. But with that being said, I will go into my pickups and drops for guys going into Week 1 that you should highly consider. So I will be starting with the quarterback position, and the number one guy that I would recommend that you try to pick up who is lightly rostered in ESPN formats is Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is only 33.6% rostered. He is a guy that I don't particularly love for fantasy necessarily. I generally try to go with other quarterbacks. I do think there will be a bump in his performance with Liam Cohen now as the coach and revitalizing that offense, but I don't love it enough to necessarily draft him. But he has a very appealing stream schedule for the next couple weeks. He starts off Week 1 against Carolina. This will be a theme of this video. I suspect that game will be a lot of high scoring. Those two teams, they have bright offensive coaches, they have horrible defenses, and they have a lot of sneaky fantasy players that are lightly drafted that could really help you a lot. So you will see a lot of players from this particular game coming up quite a bit in this video. After Trevor Lawrence plays Carolina, he gets Tennessee, which, their defense is a little bit better, but it's nothing necessarily that's amazing. And then they get Las Vegas, which has a poor secondary. So this is a great 3-game schedule for him, and I think that the Liam Cohen offense is going to shine pretty early in the season for these guys. So Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, I have iffy opinions of how involved he'll be on offense early on. But I think that in general, I suspect that Trevor Lawrence should be pretty good to start the season. I really like his 3-game schedule. And I think he's a guy that I wouldn't really necessarily recommend starting him over what is probably your starting quarterback unless you have a really bad matchup. But he is somebody that is worth stashing on the bench if you need a second quarterback. And he's one of the guys that I think has a good schedule early on that you might be able to flip him for some value that could actually help you later on in the season. Next on my list is Cam Ward. And you look long-term in the season, I generally prefer Cam Ward over Trevor Lawrence long-term. I would rather have him rostered for the whole length of the season, especially if you're working in a keeper or dynasty format. Cam Ward, though, has a pretty difficult schedule in Week 1. He gets the Denver Broncos. I suspect that will be not a good performance from him. But all that being said, I do think he is going to elevate this offense, and I think that he is going to give you some sneaky value among the undrafted guys in typical 10-team formats. He's only 25.9% rostered in ESPN leagues. And that being said, I think that he's somebody that's worth stashing and just kind of seeing what happens, because I do feel that he's going to be relevant and he will work his way into top 10 consideration on certain weeks for the fantasy football season. Next, and kind of similarly, but not as much hype around this guy necessarily for a underrated breakout, Michael Penix Jr. He's only 19.3% rostered. He gets Tampa Bay in Week 1, and I think this is a very sneaky matchup as well, where he could have a very good game and surprise a lot of people. I like him a lot if you're in a deeper league that has, like say you took Drake London early. I think Michael Penix could give you an underrated stack as a quarterback that you could stash on your bench. He is another breakout candidate among young quarterbacks that could really be a league winner for you if he lives up to the elite value that a lot of people think he can get to. He is my third quarterback that I would go with behind Trevor Lawrence and Cam Ward for this particular week 1 matchup if you're looking at guys under 50% rostered. And let's go with that same game from Carolina Jacksonville. Bryce Young, 14.6% rostered. He has a nice opening day matchup as well against the Jags defense, which is not great on his behalf. Bryce Young showed some improvement last year, started off very poorly, but that offense, adding Ted McMillan, is going to be better. Their run game should be better as well, as they've added Rico Dowdle to the mix, as well as having Chuba Hubbard there already too. So because of that, I think that he's going to continue to get better, and I think in Jacksonville he could give you a very good game. I like him as somebody that you could stream on your bench and kind of see what happens. And in 2 quarterback leagues, I think he's startable depending on who else you have in your lineup. And then I'm going to give you in this video, as well as other videos where I'm talking waiver wire, sneaky guys that are under 10% rostered. So these guys I'm talking about under 50% rostered, but an under 10% roster. This guy's only 2.1% rostered. He gave you a lot of sneaky value last year with Indianapolis, and he gets a great Week 1 matchup against a very porous Cincinnati Bengals defense. It is the 40-year-old Joe Flacco. And dare I say, I think he is startable in 2 quarterback leagues against Cincinnati. I think that he will give you pretty good value this first week, and he will really create a lot of appeal going into Week 2 because of how he does Week 1 against Cincinnati. That's my personal opinion. I see this being another high-scoring game. I see it being a good game for Jerry Jeudy and Njoku, etc. And for Joe Flacco, somebody that is under 10% roster, really under 5% roster, that I think could give you some sneaky value that is potentially startable in Week 1. Now, obviously, you're not starting him over, your Jalen Hurts, your Jaden Daniels, you're not starting him over guys like that. I'm just saying that, if you're in a deep league, you have guys on the fringe. Joe Flacco, I think, could give you potential top 15 value here that could be very valuable for you if you're in a second quarterback league. Who can you drop among that list? So I just want to preface this in saying that I'm not generally looking to make a lot of drops or moves before the season starts. But what I would advocate for it, a lot of people don't necessarily, they don't really necessarily set their roster up for success at the draft. They may take 2 tight ends, 2 kickers, 2 defenses. I wouldn't personally advocate for that unless you have a really bad matchup in Week 1. 2 kickers you should never roster. You could see my video where I talk about why you should not roster a kicker at all until right before game day on my kicker videos on this channel. You can drop a second tight end. If you have a defense that you've drafted second that is lightly rostered, you can drop them. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for trying to drop the quarterbacks that are generally rostered ahead of them because they're drafted at that highly for potential. Like J.J. McCarthy, for example, I wouldn't drop him for any of those guys. But guys on the fringe that you may have that I would consider dropping for these 5 players that I talked about, Tua, he gets kind of a tough matchup against Indianapolis early on, and I just kind of don't really see, unless he has a great matchup, he's really a stream candidate at best, and I think that he could be somebody that could be dropped in week 1 and then picked up at a later time when he has a better matchup. Stafford, same thing with him, plus he's got back injuries. Aaron Rodgers, same thing, plus he gets the Jets week 1, which I'm sure they're going to be trying to go after him after how that fiasco went last year. I don't see him having a very good performance in that game. And, I think this is a caveat if you're in redraft leagues versus, the dynasties. I would consider dropping Shedeur Sanders or Jaxson Dart for those players if you need to start in week 1. I think if you're in any type of long-term league, those two have a lot of value potential or later on as the season progresses. But early on, I don't see either of them starting or being in the picture. So if you're just focused on trying to get wins early, you're in a league that's shallow enough that you don't really need to hold on to them. I personally think that you can pick up either of those 5 quarterbacks that I mentioned earlier, and those guys can sit on the bench for a little bit or on waivers and then pick them up later depending on how those situations go. I don't generally recommend dropping guys with potential like that, but I don't see them getting on the field for quite a bit. And if you're in shallow leagues, you got to do what you got to do. Running backs. So first of all, I want to just let you know to check to see if these guys are available because they're under 70% rostered and they have a lot of value. They would be higher priority than any of the guys I'm going to talk about on this list. Jerome Ford for the Browns. He could very well be the starter, and he is probably going to do well against Cincinnati, as I mentioned earlier. Quinshon Judkins, we don't know what his situation is, but I still think he's worth rostering and holding to see what happens because whenever he does get on the field, I think he's pretty clearly their RB1. And then Zach Charbonnet, who is right now the backup in Seattle, but because of Kenneth Walker's injury history, we've seen this team like to get both running backs involved. I think he just has too much value as a standalone backup to leave unrostered. Now I will get to my 5 lightly rostered running backs under 50% that I would recommend picking up prior to week 1. And this is probably my number 1 overall player on the board. I'm talking about this team quite a bit. The guys that I would check to see if they're rostered, and I would definitely make sure they're on my team, is Dylan Sampson from the Cleveland Browns. So I mentioned the other 2 running backs on the Browns, but Sampson is the one I actually like the most for week 1 particularly. I would like to see what he can do as a rookie against Cincinnati. I know Jerome Ford is more than likely going to get the first team reps initially, but Dylan Sampson, I think, might be a better running back than Jerome Ford, and I would like to take the chance just on a rookie to see what he could do. There are certain situations where I think he could be startable against Cincinnati in week 1, but generally what I would try to do is to stash him on the bench and see what happens. But still, there's a ton of upside here because, 1, this is a rookie running back, and we don't know what Quinshon Judkins' situation is when he is getting back on the team. It's very possible that Dylan Sampson could be a starter that you can play the entire season. Not likely the whole season, but still, this has a lot of value early on. Whether or not you keep him on your roster long-term or you trade him, I think Dylan Sampson is the most likely of these guys that are under 50% rostered to go off in week 1. He is getting the Cincinnati Bengals. He's only 24.6% rostered, and he is my number 1 running back. Number 2 on my list is Ollie Gordon. This is a very similar situation for the Miami Dolphins. Devon Achane is dealing with a calf Achilles injury, and if you followed fantasy football last year with Christian McCaffrey, you know that Christian McCaffrey had an injury like this earlier on. He re-aggravated right before the season started, and then he did not play again until November. And then later on, once he got back on the field for a few weeks, he tore his PCL likely because he was compensating because he was trying not to re-injure his Achilles again. And I say that because Devon Achane could very well be heading down this path. Behind him is Jalen Wright, who has not played well and is dealing with injuries, and you have Ollie Gordon, a formerly highly ranked running back performed poorly his most recent season at Oklahoma State and dropped a little bit in this draft, but he has an incredible opportunity to take over as the lead back on this team. And I would make sure that he's rostered only 28.6%. Both Sampson and Gordon are the two running backs that I would really want to check to see on the waivers and make sure they're available, because I would definitely try to pick them up. That's what I would do if you have that kicker that you're not super attached to. Pick up Sampson or Gordon for your kicker and then get the kicker that you need for game day a couple days before the season starts. Number 3 on my list, Jaydon Blue. I don't love the matchup against Philadelphia, but he has the most upside of all 3 of these running backs, Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, the other 2. In terms of long-term potential on this team, I think he's worth a flyer to just take a look and see what happens there. I would not start him, but I think it's a situation worth monitoring to stash on your bench if you have availability. Number 4, Braelon Allen. This is still Breece Hall's team for now, but I do feel that they are moving more towards a timeshare, and Braelon Allen has a lot of standalone value should anything happen to Breece Hall. He's a very talented running back. This situation, I think, will be a little bit more of a timeshare than we're expecting, and Braelon Allen, very lowly drafted, and he's only 39.6% rostered in ESPN leagues. This is a guy that I would definitely make sure to try to get on your team if you have availability. And then the 5th guy I want to highlight, Bhayshul Tuten for the Jacksonville Jaguars against Carolina week 1. That situation is a little bit of a mess between Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. How that running back split is going to go is going to be very interesting to monitor as the season develops. Tuten is only 36% rostered, though, and I think his speed is very interesting as somebody in Liam Cohen's offense. He may be more attracted to that. We saw Bucky Irving last year get drafted kind of late in drafts, much like Bhayshul Tuten. It was a 4th-round pick. Bucky Irving was even later than that. And this is a situation where maybe they see something in him that they make him the starter and then he goes off, much like what happened with Cohen's offense last year with Tampa Bay with Bucky Irving. So a situation to monitor and see what happens. He does have a lot of obstacles, though, including Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, who are pretty young running backs as well, to try to get there. But it's still worth a shot to monitor this situation. And then under 10% rostered. This guy is only 1.7% rostered. Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears. Chicago has a pretty complicated running back situation as well. They have DeAndre Swift, who is a veteran that they are pretty much have been trying to replace for seemingly the whole offseason, but he's still there. And although I love his upside already because he's one of the only running backs that's not injured, Monangai is a 7th-round rookie that has potential, because Swift has been so inconsistent through his career, to potentially take over this backfield. And somebody that is lightly rostered like this could really be a sleeper if he can get healthy for week 1. Right now his injury is undisclosed what exactly it is, but by all accounts he's going to play. I think Monangai is somebody very interesting to take a look at, lightly rostered, that may be available in the deep leagues. Drop candidates, and this is, I generally don't advocate dropping running backs unless you have just no room on your roster. Tajae Spears, I would put him on IR, but if you don't have an IR spot, I think he's a drop candidate. Brian Robinson is interesting because he is a drop candidate because he's really, his only value right now to me is the handcuff for Christian McCaffrey. You could hold him and see what happens with this situation. I think the better move personally, if you have Brian Robinson, is to try to trade him to the McCaffrey owner. And ideally, if they have somebody like a Dylan Sampson or an Ollie Gordon, that could be a very amicable one-for-one trade that actually works well for both sides. He gets his handcuff, you get your lightly rostered running back that could be a potential starter. And then Najee Harris is droppable because I think Hampton is going to take over this backfield pretty early, and Najee Harris is not looking like he's going to play. Hold Joe Mixon, though. I know that his injury looks pretty bleak right now, but he has too much value to just put out there on waivers for somebody. Even if you don't have an IR spot, I would recommend holding Joe Mixon. Wide receivers. Check if these guys are available under 70%. Josh Downs, I think that there's a real chance where he could be a weekly starter. Miami is the first game. I think that Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to be matched up against the bigger Michael Pittman, and this will create a lot of opportunity for downs to be very useful in PPR for that team. Jaydon Higgins for the Houston Texans, and then Xavier Legette for the Carolina Panthers. Both those teams need a second receiver, and I think those are the most likely candidates to step up in those matchups. The one receiver that I like the most, and again, I talk about this team a lot, Cedric Tillman versus the Cincinnati Bengals. I love all the Browns' offensive weapons against this Bengals team, but particularly Tillman because Joe Flacco, I think, gives you some great value and potential as the backup, as the lightly rostered quarterback that may be on your bench, and he goes up against a poor Cincinnati defense. You're going to see some benefit for guys like Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku in this matchup, but don't forget about Cedric Tillman. He's only 38.6% rostered. There's a world where he could get into the end zone. I think he's a candidate to get over 75 receiving yards as well in this game. I think this is a great matchup against Cincinnati, and the best thing about it is that on this particular team, he could continue to be involved as the season goes along. They need a second receiver, so whether or not you take the Cincinnati game and you try to trade him for value or hold him long term, I think he could be a very good receiver for you. Number 2, I don't love the matchup as much in week 1 for this particular player, but I think that there's a real chance that he could be the number 1, if not the number 2 target on this team for the New England Patriots. It is Demario Douglas. I've been high on this player before and he's kind of let me down, but at only 18.1% rostered, this team is currently, it's unknown what the status is of Stephon Diggs, if he's going to be ready to go for week 1. But Demario Douglas has a chance to be the number 2 wide receiver on this team, get a lot of receptions in the middle of the field, be very useful in PPR as a slot receiver. I think Demario Douglas is a very underrated receiver who has a clear void that this team needs. Hopefully Mike Vrabel can implement a system where he can get involved and be the second wide receiver for the Patriots. I think he's the best opportunity for that. And if Diggs is not healthy or if he doesn't regain his form, there's a chance he could be the number 1 target there as well. Really like Demario Douglas at a very low cost. Number 3 on my list is Wan'Dale Robinson. I really like Wan'Dale Robinson too, as this is a guy that also should be the second wide receiver on the Giants. Malik Neighbors is going to be getting the majority of the targets on this team, and that's why he's going in the first round in most leagues, but he's dealing with injury right now, and if for whatever reason Malik Neighbors is not good to go for week 1, Robinson has a smash matchup where he should be heavily involved against Washington. I think the quarterback play is a little bit better this year with Russell Wilson. At least should be able to get the ball down the field to get these wide receivers involved. And Robinson, to me, is somebody that I think has a lot of value potentially long-term as well, because they do need a second receiver, and he's a candidate to fill that void for them. More of a longer-term project at number 4. He's only 20.3% rostered. Luther Burden for the Chicago Bears. Chicago, I don't love their offensive weapons necessarily because they just have so many mouths to feed between DJ Moore, Colston Loveland, Rome Odunze, the running backs. They also have Olamide Zaccheaus there, he gets involved. I think there's going to be some frustrating games, much like you saw last year with the Bears. But Luther Burden, they took him in the second round, and I think that Ben Johnson must really like him, and there's a chance that he could get on the field very early on. Luther Burden is worth at least stashing to see what happens in week 1. I would not start him, but he has a lot of talent, and it's possible Ben Johnson may want to utilize him early. Number 5 on this list for me is Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is 37.3% rostered. Again, they need a second wide receiver in Denver, and I think he's got the best chance to fill that void. He's a very fast receiver. Should be good getting downfield targets. Probably not really the best for PPR, but can give you a lot of high ceiling performances potentially. The only problem is that he's dealing with a groin injury. And that's what leads me to my under 10% roster. This player that could go off in week 1. This guy has, and is on the same team as Marvin Mims. It's Troy Franklin, Tennessee Titans, only 1.5% rostered. if Mims is not good to go, Troy Franklin played with Bo Nix in college. And I think there's a chance where now they've cleared out Devon Villay in a trade. Evan Ingram is new. May take him a little while to get adjusted to this offensive scheme. It's possible Troy Franklin could be the second wide receiver on this team. And in a matchup against Tennessee, where I think they should do pretty well against that secondary, he is a guy to monitor and possibly worth rostering and stashing to see what happens should Marvin Mims get injured. Or should Marvin Mims not play. He's already injured right now, my bad. But really like Troy Franklin as a lightly rostered, 1.5% rostered guy that could go off in week 1 and give you incredible value as a potential second wide receiver in Denver. Other honorable mention names, these are all rookies. Pat Bryant on the Denver Broncos, same thing. Dante Thornton Jr. for the Las Vegas Raiders, and Isaac Tesla. I don't like these guys necessarily as much as Franklin to potentially step up, but these are all under 10% rostered rookies as well that are worth monitoring to see what happens. Who are the drop candidates among wide receivers? If you're in very shallow leagues, I would strongly, and you don't have an IR spot, I would strongly consider the trio of Darnell Mooney, Brandon Ayuk, and Chris Godwin. Godwin, I would try to hold on to as much as you can if you don't have an IR spot. Darnell Mooney and Ayuk, though, I think are both droppable because I don't expect either of them to play for quite a while. Godwin, we know week 5, but Mooney and Ayuk, it's still up in the air whether or not they're going to be back by then. So if you don't have the IR spot and you want to get some guys that could potentially go off week 1, I would strongly consider dropping them in the shallow leagues. In the deeper leagues, Hollywood Brown, I just do not like him as a fantasy football player. I don't think this Chiefs offense really has a lot of opportunity for him to be fantasy relevant. I would be dropping him. And then Christian Kirk, Romeo Doubs. We've seen these guys for a couple years now, and I don't really feel like there's anything suggesting that their situations are going to change and they're going to go off heading into this season. And then I wouldn't recommend dropping either of these players. I would try to hold them more so for trade value. Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins. They're both on new teams that theoretically could use them, so I wouldn't really want to put them out there on waivers just because they're going to have name value that you could use in a trade. I would recommend holding them and see if they do have a good week 1 because I think more than likely that will be good trade bait that you can use in a package with another player to try to get the guy that you really want on your team. Tight ends. So check if these two are available under 70%. Jake Ferguson and Kyle Pitts. These are guys I wouldn't really necessarily recommend starting, but they both have roles on their team that could potentially lend them to being the second wide receiving option, not wide receiver, but the second receiving option on those teams. So I would check them if they're there, and I would stash them on your bench potentially. Tight ends that I like, though, that are under 50% rostered, and this player may even be in start consideration for me, is Zach Ertz against the Giants. The Giants have a good pass rush. That's one of the few good things that they have going for them on their team, and I think Jaden Daniels might work the middle of the field more so than deep threats if he doesn't have time to get the ball down the field. Zach Ertz could be heavily involved. Of all the guys that have had the most rapport with him so far in training camp this year, it's been Zach Ertz. Deebo Samuel is new. Terry McLaurin held out. Zach Ertz could have a good first game just while this team's offense is getting settled. I think that he is definitely in start consideration for me. And since he's only 39% rostered, he's somebody that should be kept in, or he's somebody that should be considered to play in a lot of leagues as well. Number 2, Brenton Strange against Carolina. That matchup could be great for both teams, as I've said multiple times. He's only 17% rostered. And, I don't think he's start consideration, but DFS or it's a stash in your fantasy benches, I think that's definitely a good play. Be interesting to see how this Jacksonville second option works out beyond Brian Thomas at 1. It's possible Strange could be the second preferred target if Travis Hunter is going to be playing both ways pretty often. Number 3, Jonnu Smith. dealing with injuries, and he has Pat Freiermuth there now, but he was a top 5 tight end last year. He's only 24.3% rostered. I think he's definitely worth rostering this year, considering how well he played last season. And then Hunter Henry, same argument that was made towards Demario Douglas, you can use for Henry as well, that he could be the second receiving target for Drake May in New England. He gets Las Vegas in week 1, which is a pretty good matchup for tight ends. 41% roster. This is another guy that could be in stream and start consideration too. And then Darren Waller versus Indianapolis. I would not start him, but it's worth monitoring this situation because of how good Jonnu Smith was in that offense last year. He's only 21.7% rostered. And then 2 guys under 10%. I'll give you a bonus here. There are 2 players that I really like under 10% rostered that I think are definitely have a lot of interesting appeal and could very well go off in week 1. Mason Taylor. Jason Taylor's, I believe he's like his youngest brother or like son or something. I don't exactly remember I'm pretty sure he's his son. I got to go back and double check the relationship between them. But he's the tight end for the Jets. He gets Pittsburgh. Not a great matchup, but Justin Fields needs a second target. It's Garrett Wilson, and then there's a lot of question marks after that. Mason Taylor, the rookie, could be heavily involved, and in PPR, he could give you a pretty good floor value as a tight end. And then he's only 5.8% rostered, and then even less rostered at 1.1%, Jatavion Sanders of the Carolina Panthers. I think Xavier Legette is most likely to be the second receiving target on that team, but against Jacksonville, there's a lot of potential here. Sanders as the tight end looked promising last year, had an unfortunate injury that kind of derailed his progress, but he gets a good matchup here in week 1, and this will be an interesting situation to monitor. Coker is on IR now. Adam Thielen traded. Somebody's going to have to step up as the second receiver after Tet McMillan on this team. Could very well be Jatavion Sanders. And then real quick, defenses and kickers that I like that you can stream heading into week 1. Arizona at only 43.7% roster gets New Orleans. Their quarterback situation is looking like the worst in the league right now. They have Spencer Rattler at quarterback. That is a great matchup, and I would definitely be looking at the Arizona Cardinals to play week 1. If you have that Buffalo Bills, Baltimore Ravens game, I would play Arizona over either of those 2 defenses. That would be a great stream for week 1. Other good ones to look at are Washington against the New York Giants. They're only 12.4% rostered. And then Green Bay is still out there despite the Micah Parsons trade. They're only 31.5% rostered. I don't love that matchup against Detroit, but it's still an interesting situation to monitor because I think they should be a good defense with top 12 upside. And then kickers. This guy's only 42.6% rostered, and he hit a 70-yard field goal in preseason. It's Cam Little of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, that's a great matchup. Everything I've said about Trevor Lawrence in that matchup, I want a piece of Cam Little as a streaming kicker as well. 42.6% roster. That would be a great guy that you could pick up on waivers if you went the route of not drafting a kicker like I've recommended. Other guys that I like, Matt Gay gets the Giants. I think he's a very underrated kicker as well. He's only 35.9% rostered. I expect them to be scoring quite a bit in that game. Will Lutz against Tennessee. At altitude, it makes the long kicks more likely to happen, and he's only 16.8% rostered. Good offense, good matchup against Tennessee. One of the best kicking options again in week 1 that you can get on waivers. And then another guy, I've made fun of this guy a lot because he gets overdrafted many years in the past, but now that he's getting passed up a lot, Evan McPherson of the Bengals gets Cleveland in week 1. I think that's a great streaming matchup for a kicker. He's only 17.5% rostered. And then my under 10 bonus for the kicker, Younghoe Koo in Atlanta against Tampa Bay. He's only 7.9% rostered. I think he will be heavily involved in that game and will give you a great performance there too. So those are my streams for week 1. So check out these videos Monday morning. I'm going to be giving you early waiver wire previews for each week, give you some quick analysis of the games before, how I think that will affect their value and guys that you want to get on your team as the season progresses. I will talk little bit more about trade value in those videos. Right now, there's not too much to really talk without any games to show for changes in value that may happen. But I will get into buy low, sell high, as well as pick up and drops for future waiver previews. And then this weekend, I will be doing the start sit on Sunday. This video pretty much covers a lot of the waiver wire guys that I would discuss anyway, but as in general, what you'll see during the week is I'll talk my under 50% streams Saturday, and then Sunday morning you'll get your live start sit. So tune into those, ask any questions you got, and ask any questions in the comments. I reply to all my commenters, as you can see. If you have any questions about your team and how to approach week one, any start sit questions, let me know. And I hope you guys have a good week and enjoy the rest of your Labor Day weekend. We'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.